what's up, metal and heavy music fans? It's Flight of Icarus again with MetalTrenches.com, and today we're talking about Pennsylvania newcore band TALLAH featuring Max Portnoy on drums and known metal YouTuber Justin Bonitz on vocals with their new album Matriphagy via Earache Records. And hey, if you like to be kept up to date with the best and brightest metal bands and albums from the underground and above, then stick with me by hitting that subscribe button down below. TALLAH are influenced by the likes of classic nu metal bands like Slipknot, Korn, and Linkin Park, as well as newer acts like Code Orange, Vane, Candy, and Fire from the Gods. Justin in particular wears these influences on his sleeve, even breaking into some of that trademark Jonathan Davis scatting on Kungen and Murder Seed. And when he's not alternating between Korn and Slipknot worship and occasionally sounding a bit like Spencer from Periphery, he's throwing in some pretty raunchy hardcore, death metal, deathcore gutturals for good measure, and even a nice little arf arf alongside some sick HM2 distortion on Too Quick to Grieve, as well as some Blackened vibes on Cottonmouth. These are extremely effective not only in amplifying the intensity of the songwriting, but also reminding the listener that their influences run deeper than what one might initially assume. While his clean singing is unfortunately one of my lesser enjoyed parts of the album, it does have a certain charm in its manic imperfections, much like similar implementation from the likes of Corey Taylor early in his career, or to throw a deep cut reference at you, do you remember that song Superman's Dead from Our Lady Peace? There are certain moments, especially early on Kungen, where his wavering vibrato definitely struck that 90s chord. Overall, I'd say they still exemplify why I always prefer my nu metal to keep things heavy, but these influences and once more the Korn vibes on the chorus of Placenta represent when it works. But the one influence that I was most reminded of early on listening to some of these vocals, absent from the promo announcement, was Head PE. Justin's fast-paced, aggressive fusions of hip-hop and metal alongside the groove-ridden instrumentation on tracks like No One Should Read This and Overconfidence definitely draw a comparison to Jared Gomes. Maybe a little Mikey from Sixth in there too, for good measure. Here's my crutch. I'm a needle for system. I'm marginally obsessed with the way I present myself. In any case, his vocal gymnastics make even more sense considering that his How to Scream 10 Different Techniques is one of the most popular scream tutorials on YouTube at approximately 3 million views. Justin has cited everything from horror movies to Disney villains as an influence on his performances, and it comes through with some of the weirder character voices on the album, sometimes even using a British accent.
I just make noises, and if it sounds cool and it doesn't hurt me, awesome.
But it's far from just Justin who internalizes all of these influences. The entire band clearly spent a lot of time in the late 90s and early 2000s listening to Iowa, Follow the Leader, and also the first two Soulfly albums. Their steadfast dedication to this once redheaded stepchild of a metal genre is more than obvious listening to the album right down to the sharp snare tone. There are a number of riffs that could have been taken straight from Korn's first 4 albums with that same eerie, squealy approach that redefined how many metal players thought that the instrument should be played. It's not always about speed and solos, sometimes it's about building an atmosphere. There's even a part on We the Sad where the guitar and bass taken together might as well be lifted directly from some forgotten Korn B-side. Other times, these parts are more fully absorbed into chunkier riffs a la Vane, letting the slides and shrieking tones ring out like lightning amidst a rumbling storm of screams, chugs, and two-stepping rhythms, as on the opening of Cottonmouth and my personal favorite track, No One Should Read This. It's on this one that I think the fusions come together perfectly to form something that is utterly infectious, intensely heavy, and truly head-turning. Speaking of intensely heavy, there are some seriously stupid breakdowns to enjoy on Matriphagy that are sure to leave blood in the pit. The most notable is probably the super slow one that closes out the aforementioned We the Sad, right after a particularly sick little drum solo from Max, I might add. Not one of my favorite songs overall, but you can't deny that drive to break stuff. Still furthering the Slipknot connection, several songs also utilize the DJ scratching meets total mayhem that we came to love from Sid, in particular on their first two albums. This was a welcome addition considering it's an aspect of the genre that I never felt became overused and fizzled out pretty quickly. Check out my other personal favorite track, L.E.D, for some great scratching moments alongside other great riffs and oddball vocal moments. And while I know that I said this is the same music that defied the previous notion that all metal should have solos, that doesn't mean that TALLAH are above them. In fact, there is a particularly ripping example about halfway into the otherwise very moody, later career Slipknot sounding The Silo that cemented the fact that these guys may know how to play much more than they're letting on. On a note of aesthetic, I also dig that they made so many videos to go along with the album. While nu metal has a definitive sound on its own, it's also inextricable from its overall fashion trends. As you may have noticed in many of these clips, expect plenty of weird haircuts, fishnets, LED lights, etc. that we all sported at some point in some tucked away shameful photo album. Or you're in your 30s still making videos on YouTube in a mask. But to quote an era-relevant lyric, in the end, does it even matter? Overall, count me in. I find Matriphagy to be a pretty entertaining romp that showcases a number of talents from a band who definitely have what it takes to revive and ultimately reform a genre that has been dead and buried for some time. On the flip side, I don't find TALLAH's music to be as consistent and forward-thinking as some of their peers, namely Code Orange. Maybe if this wasn't the same year that we got Underneath, I might feel differently. TALLAH seem to get a little lost in the influences, whereas Code Orange and Vane fold them into something that ends up feeling fresh and modern. It's like a big box of really cool Lego pieces without a set of instructions of how to best put them together. I give Matriphagy an 8 for enjoyability. True to even some of the nu metal classics from back in the day, the album does feel a bit overlong at 53 minutes and wavers in some places as a result. I give it an 8 for musicianship. I dig the eclecticism, and some of these performances are pretty top-notch, but the songwriting could definitely use some tightening up. And I give them an 8 for innovation. It's the same old bag of tricks, but with just enough of a new spin and fresh face that it certainly doesn't risk getting lost in the shuffle, which can often be the case for even some of the best albums this year. So 8s across the board and a B- for TALLAH and Matriphagy via Earache Records. Looking forward to hear where this band goes from here. Y'all, thanks as always for watching, and let me know down in the comments what you thought of this record and what was your favorite nu metal album back in the day. Also be sure to check out my nu metal tier list. It's one of the most popular videos on the channel. And in general, stick around for more album reviews, rankings, and band interviews. Plenty of reasons to subscribe, again, if you have not already. Also in the description, you can find links to our social media, the email newsletter, and our Patreon and Subscribe Star if you want to take that extra jump to becoming a full-on supporter. But that'll do it for now. I'm sweating my ass off. Flood Vickers signing off. I will see you in the trenches.